Hi, I'm Father Michael Orsi. I'm your host for Action for Life Television, that good news program which brings you the big G for the gospel of Jesus Christ and the little g, all the good things that people do to put that gospel of life into action. Hey, again, what I did today, I got us a doctor, a real live MD to talk to us today. And the reason why we have him on is because he is the president of the, wait a minute, let me get this right now, gang, the Guild of the Catholic Medical Association in Southwest Florida. And it's a branch of the Catholic Medical Association. And, believe it or not, you have physicians who kind of try to guide themselves by Christian principles. And in this case, of course, the Catholic principles as to what is moral, what is immoral, what is just, what is allowed, what's not allowed. Some guidance. Sometimes we need moral guidance, especially in this day and age, folks. They're talking about transgender people. Can you mutilate a person to change them into something that they're not? You see how this gets? Also, there are problems with reproduction. Look, I know, and there are people oftentimes that have problems getting pregnant. Women have problems getting pregnant. And sometimes you have to go to the doctor and say, hey, doctor, could you help me out here? Something I can do in order to have a child. You know how important it is for people. They want to have children. Sometimes people, after they have them, say, I made a big mistake. I shouldn't have had any. Every once in a while, my mother would say, oh, what did I do? What did I do? Me and my three brothers were fighting all the time. All right. Anyway, you get my point here. All right. So we have Dr. Hannan with us, who does a lot of work dealing with physicians and patients in order to help them to come to good medical decisions. And he gives talks around. I think he was just recently at Ave Maria University, and he was talking about something like in vitro fertilization. He'll tell us what that's all about. And he'll tell us, the parameters that we can work around in order to help somebody to have a baby. So, Dr. Hannan, welcome aboard. So nice to have you with us.
Well, thank you, Father. It's good to be here.
Should we take this as an office visit? We're doing, Zoom medicine now, Zoom medicine. Okay, yes. Doctor, tell us about the guild that you are president of here in Southwest Florida.
Okay, so Father, as you alluded to, there's a National Catholic Medical Association, and their motto there is we choose to practice medicine within the principles and guidelines of the Catholic faith. And we do this by fellowship. We do it by mentoring the younger physicians coming up, and education is a big part of it as well. Okay. So around the country, there are a number of guilds, and it's usually associated with a diocese. Okay. So we are the guild within the Diocese of Venice. We exist with the approval of Bishop Duane, and he often attends a lot of our events, actually. And as you said, we just had one down at Ave. I wasn't actually the speaker. I was the event planner. Father Tadeusz Pacholczyk from the National Catholic Bioethics Center was the speaker at this event.
Okay, so you had this, let's just talk about this because, folks, a lot of you I know have questions about how do you help people to have babies? What's allowed and what's not allowed? So, Doctor, tell us, what was that conference all about?
Well, Father Tad gave a 2-lecture presentation, and he took people through kind of our natural yearning for children, and then, what happens when couples find out that they're having trouble. And technically, infertility is when you've tried for about a year and have been unsuccessful in conceiving. And in his first talk, he also had the assistance of a young mother, a young lady from Rochester, New York, who came and went through an infertility evaluation, but did not accept in vitro fertilization as a viable option.
Okay, can you tell us why? Can you tell us what in vitro fertilization is, and then why she didn't want to do it?
So in vitro fertilization is where conception occurs, say, in glassware, in a test tube, sometimes called the test tube babies. So normally the sperm and the egg meet, fertilization occurs, conception occurs at that point, and as Catholics, we believe that life begins at that point. In vitro fertilization takes that moment of conception outside of the womb, outside of the woman's body, and it occurs with the assistance of third parties, meaning the physician who does this, the technicians, creating a conceptus, an embryo in the lab, which will then be reimplanted in the uterus of the woman, and hopefully it would implant, and then she would take that child to term and then deliver a baby. Okay. And the overriding principle from the church on all of these things is if you have a technique that assists the marital act in having a baby, that's acceptable. What's not acceptable is if you replace the marital act with something, say, in a laboratory.
Okay, well, how do you assist the marital act? How does that work?
Well, they start by doing an evaluation of why someone or why a couple can't get pregnant. So sometimes it might be the man's problem. The sperm count may not be high enough. But often the woman can't ovulate, or perhaps there's an anatomic problem where the egg can't get down the fallopian tubules to meet the sperm. And so once they figure that out, there may be medical therapies that are quite acceptable to the Catholic Church. Now, for example, the lady that we had giving her personal testimony had something called polycystic ovary syndrome. So she was not able to ovulate well. So with the help of two medicines, one called Clomid, which a lot of people may be familiar with, that will stimulate eggs to be released. And then there was another hormone that they would inject, and the doctor helped her kind of adjust the timing. And eventually she and her husband did conceive a child, did bring him to term. And actually she has 4 children now by this method. But she had told them from the start that she was not interested in going to in vitro fertilization. This was advised to her multiple times as an option. But they did their research. I think they talked to their pastor as well, and realized that there were things about it that were morally objectionable.
Could you tell us what they saw to be morally objectionable?
Sure. So the first thing is that it undermines the marital act, the private act between a husband and a wife. And within that context, the creation of new life.
So lovemaking and life-giving were separated, and they felt that we can't do that.
Correct.
Okay.
In the sense that every child in the optimal circumstance should have a right to a mother and a father and to be conceived in a loving relationship and within the protective confines of the womb. And even getting away from this idea that babies are a right. They're not a right. Babies are a gift. And coming to that understanding, we start looking at this as a commodity. You're having this transaction with a third party to maybe rather than an encounter with your spouse. And then that's just sort of the couple part of this. I mean, then you get into, okay, you now have created who knows how many embryos in a petri dish.
Okay, so maybe it's what happens when you put the sperm in with the egg or eggs? You have a number, and then all of a sudden, you have a whole bunch of embryos.
That's quite possible. And so the fertility doctor will look under the microscope and look for certain characteristics visually and pick out the ones he thinks are the most viable. And they rapidly developing techniques where they can take it even further than this, where they can figure out some of the features of the baby. Oh, this one's likely to have blue eyes. This one's going to be a boy. This one's going to be a girl. And if they say they try to implant 3, 4, 5 embryos in the woman, hoping that one implants and grows to be a term baby. What if 4 implant? And what if it's kind of a small frame lady where carrying 4 babies to term will then pose added risk to her health and her viability? Then they start talking about reducing the number of pregnancies that she's carrying.
Yeah, I heard the term selective reduction, folks. That means abortion. Excuse me, go ahead.
Exactly. I mean, what a terrible decision to have to make. And in many cases, it starts to border on eugenics, where you're choosing who lives by virtue of certain features of their body. Then you start looking at, well, what do you do with all the embryos you didn't implant? Sometimes they're disposed of. Sometimes they're frozen. Sometimes they're used in research. All of this should be kind of spelled out in their informed consent, but I think many couples just sort of are focused on having that baby and kind of not really paying attention to all of these other offshoots that can occur that are clearly morally problematic.
All right, well, we do have a question for you about what does happen to all of those embryos that aren't used. You said some of them go for, you can't just say, okay, go experiment on this one. And a lot of people say, we'll just put them in the freezer. And then if we need them, we'll use them down the road. But, for human beings, down the road isn't that long.
Right. That is a real dilemma. And Father Tadeusz Pacholczyk addressed that. And there is even discussion within Catholic bioethicists whether these embryos should be implanted in surrogate mothers or whether they should be just allowed to thaw out and pass away, or whether they should be just left in the deep freeze indefinitely for lack of any other option here, and encouraging the parents to establish monies or maybe even a trust fund when they're gone to try to maintain them until perhaps they die naturally in the deep freeze, if you will.
Wow. Doc, this is kind of like what do you do? I mean, there must be like a million of them around, more, I don't know, around the country.
I believe it's more than 1 million frozen embryos in the United States. In fact, have any idea how many babies have been born by in vitro fertilization worldwide since 1978? Okay, it's 12 million.
Wow, holy cow.
Number from Father Tad.
Yeah.
And about 1 million, more than 1 million currently in frozen animated suspension there in these freezers, human beings.
Wow. I don't mean to be disrespectful. I think that I would just pray for a power shortage. I mean, that's about the easiest way out of it. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah. I'm sure they have backup generators for those, Father.
When you talk about something like this, and you say there are 12 million people born from in vitro fertilization, I guess if you told them that it's not a good thing to do, they'd be rather offended, right?
Yeah, it's a very delicate situation, and one that I think many people, including Catholics, have difficulty understanding. Why, if the church is so pro-life, what do you have against in vitro fertilization that, creates life, albeit outside the womb?
Well, you also said that you could put them up for adoption. Do we have some problems with that too?
Embryo adoption. Well, yeah. I mean, ultimately, what do you end up doing with that embryo? I mean, is it going to be implanted? So that's morally problematic. Is it going to thaw out and die? I mean, you still have the same dilemma, at least from the Catholic perspective.
Okay, so
And it is somewhat of an injustice, Father, to the baby. I mean, when the alternative is death, I guess some people would, justify doing just about anything. But you're putting a baby whose biologic parents may not even be involved at this point. The baby could be implanted in a surrogate mother's uterus, brought to term, and then question is, whose baby is it at that point?
yeah,
All sorts of legal surrogacy issues stem off of this type of thing.
or I guess you could, have a case where, well, maybe the embryo is 100 years old. My parents died 100 years ago. I mean, folks, this is like Frankenstein stuff.
It gets strange, and then there's freezer burn, and you wonder exactly how well they are preserved after all that time in the freezer.
Yeah. Plus, as you said, it seems that the fertility doctors want to implant a number of embryos just to get one that's going to take. Is that the term? One that's going to be able to be brought to term.
Yes, that's right. That's the hope. But sometimes they overshoot. Now there are countries that have enacted laws that limit the number of embryos you can create in the lab. And there are mandates that they all must be implanted. I believe Germany was the country that enacted that law. So there are avenues legally that are being addressed through the pro-life movement and support to try to at least limit the damage that can be done here.
As you can imagine, producing this wonderful program, Action for Life, it costs a great deal of money. We're going to need your help. So if you would like to donate to keep this good news program on the air, please go to your computer, your cell phone, actionforlife.net. Hey gang, I know a lot of you sometimes can't watch all of our episodes of Action for Life. However, we have a solution for that. All you have to do is go to YouTube and search for Action for Life Florida. And you can catch up on all the shows, and guess what? Extra added bonus, you get to hear my weekly homily. So, YouTube and you make a fine couple. I can recall there was a case a number of years ago where a convent of nuns in Italy wanted to take the embryos and implant them in the nuns. And I think the Vatican said, no, you can't do that.
Yeah. Well, I would agree that the Vatican's position is, for Father Tad's comments this weekend are aligned with the Vatican's statements there.
Now, I want to ask you something else about, I don't know if this is really in vitro fertilization, but a case came to me a number of years ago where the man's sperm was inadequate. There's a low sperm count, or the sperm couldn't swim good enough, whatever the case may be. And the couple said to me, the doctor wanted to do sperm washing. Could you explain that?
I'm not sure what that term means, Father.
Okay.
I do know that questions come up from our faith about how does a man donate sperm.
Well, that was
testing.
it. They had to get the sperm from him first in a way that, certainly is not approved of, masturbation. And
Right.
then they would, I'm told, wash the sperm, and then they would insert the sperm. But I am also told that there's another way that the couple could have natural intercourse, collect the sperm, and then reinsert the sperm after it has been washed. Do you know anything about that?
Well, a little bit. So how can a man be tested and still not violate our Catholic principles? Because all marital acts should be open to the creation of life. So what they do is they put holes in the condom so that sperm can get through. A natural marital act could lead to a baby, but there's enough left within the condom that can be taken to the lab and tested. So that's the way that is addressed and still believed to be within the teachings of the church.
And then what is left in the condom, the perforated condom, that can be washed, whatever they do, and inserted.
Yes, I can't comment on that one. I don't know the technology there, what they're doing with that.
Okay. Anyway, so you being a doctor, a couple comes to you and they say, hey, look, we're having a hard time. You send them out to be tested. Tell the man to go get tested. Tell the woman to go get tested. And they say to you, yeah, well, you say to them, well, everything came back, this is wrong, that's wrong. Well, nothing's wrong. It's just not happening. Well, what do you do then? They're desperate for a child.
Well, Father addressed the pastoral part of this, as well as, what do friends say to friends, and how do you show compassion to a couple? And it may just be as simple, perhaps viewed as inadequate, as saying, I'm very sorry that you're going through this and that you're not able to have children at this point. And maybe not saying even much more than that. And then at the pastoral side, trying to get the couple to understand that their worth, their own dignity is not based on whether they can have children or not. And that God has his plan, and his plan for them may be one of not having their own biologic children, and coming to grips with that and dealing with it together and moving forward with their lives. And then, you bring up the topic of adoption and have children in that way, maybe not their biologic, but children that they can raise and nurture.
Can I ask you, how many couples would choose to go that route if they say, hey, look, I have friends that went to such and such a fertility doctor. This is what he did, and we want our own baby, and, we don't want to adopt. I mean, how many couples would buy that Catholic moral stance? What do you think?
Well, I think a lot of them wouldn't buy it. And I know that a lot of them aren't buying it. And many Catholic couples do go through in vitro fertilization. And I mean, not that they're willfully ignoring the church. I think they just don't know the church's teachings. They haven't perhaps done the research to see why the church feels the way it does and guides us the way it does.
I remember a number of years ago, I was preaching on that topic. I think it was in the late 90s, maybe. And there was the first test tube babies at the time, maybe earlier than that. It was a long time ago anyway. But some statement came out from the Vatican. We had a bishop who was a moral theologian, and he wrote a letter in the diocesan newspaper explaining the Catholic teaching, and that the in vitro fertilization was not a moral thing to do for Catholics. And man, oh man, I walked out of church reading the people. A woman started yelling at me, pointing to her stomach. What do you think this is from? What do you think this is from? I mean, it's a tough one. I mean, I was repeating what the bishop said. But I agreed with the bishop. But then again, I said, hey, if I was this lady and her husband, maybe I would have gotten mad too. I don't know.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I know I was at church not too long ago, and I saw someone I know there, and I saw his beautiful young boy there, and I knew that there had been conceived by in vitro fertilization, and you see this beautiful boy, and you wonder, how can that be wrong? Of course, the church welcomes and loves all babies, no matter how they were conceived and brought into the world. And by the way, in vitro fertilization isn't the only thing. I mean, you've got prostitution, you've got incest, you've got rape. There's other ways that babies can come into the world other than in a husband-wife marriage, loving relationship. And the church welcomes all those children.
See, that's an important thing, folks, to remember, that no matter which way the baby was conceived, the church always welcomes the child. Whatever happened before, that's not the baby's fault, but that child is welcomed into God's family, and that child is going to be welcomed because sacramentally the child will be baptized and become part of God's family. Remember, a number of years ago, New York Times ran a big expose on in vitro fertilization and said, of course, the Catholic Church would reject these children. There's nothing further from the truth. Don't let them lie to you. You bring the kids in, no matter what happened, how they got here, they're God's children. We do something with them. Now, doctor, pretty soon, next week, 2 weeks, we're going to be talking at the White Mass. The White Mass, and that's a mass for physicians, medical people at St. Agnes's Church in Naples. And we're going to have doctors and lawyers and me, and we're going to be talking about spirituality and medicine. And Dr. Hannan is going to be there. So if you are in the medical field, look up St. Agnes Church. On October the 21st, begins at 8:30 in the morning and goes to around noontime. And a lot of doctors and a lot of nurses and a lot of medical people will be there to explain Catholic teaching and spirituality regarding medical profession. And not just Catholic, Christian. And all of you are welcome. God bless you. Doctor, I know you're for action, I'm for action, and I know you are too. We would like to thank our generous sponsors for their wonderful support. Thanks for watching. Please join us next time for Action for Life. I'm for action, and I hope you are too. I'm Father Michael Orsi. I am your host for Action for Life Television, that good news program which talks about the gospel of Jesus Christ, the big G, and the little g, all the good things that people are doing to put the gospel of life into action. So please join us for the next episode of Action for Life.